They were so sure you'd come crawling back. They were waiting for the apology, the tears, the late night message. And then, nothing. What happens when a narcissist sets the stage for your desperation and you never show up? That's the moment the entire illusion cracks. If you're someone who chose silence instead of begging, type "I stayed silent" in the comments. Reclaim that power, own it. The narcissist's expectation of emotional dependence is not accidental. It is something they quietly cultivate from the very beginning. In relationships shaped by strong narcissistic traits, often associated with patterns described in narcissistic personality disorder, there is an unspoken contract. You will need them more than they need you. They test this early. They observe how quickly you respond, how much reassurance you seek, how afraid you are of conflict, how uncomfortable you are with distance. Every insecurity becomes data. Every moment of vulnerability becomes leverage. Over time, they position themselves as the emotional center of gravity. They may alternate intense affection with sudden withdrawal, creating a cycle that strengthens attachment through anxiety. When warmth disappears, your nervous system activates. You feel urgency, fear, confusion. If you reach out to restore connection, that reaction confirms something powerful to them. You are emotionally hooked. The more you try to fix, soothe, or repair, the more they interpret it as dependence rather than love. This expectation becomes part of their internal narrative. They start believing that you cannot regulate your emotions without them. They assume you will chase because you always have. They assume you will apologize because you fear abandonment. They assume silence will break you because it has before. What they are really relying on is a pattern they helped engineer. Emotional dependence is not always natural. It can be conditioned through inconsistency, criticism, comparison, and strategic withholding. In their mind, your identity slowly merges with the role of pursuer. They become comfortable escalating distance because they believe the outcome is guaranteed. They see themselves as the prize, the authority, the one with options, while you are cast as the one who must maintain the bond. This is why they wait with such confidence when conflict happens. They are not hoping you will beg, they are expecting it. That expectation is built on a history of reinforced dynamics where your anxiety fed their certainty and your pursuit strengthened their sense of control. The power dynamic built around you begging is not loud or obvious at first. It forms gradually through repetition. In relationships shaped by strong narcissistic traits, often aligned with patterns seen in narcissistic personality disorder, control is rarely direct. Instead, it is established through emotional conditioning. When conflict arises, they may withdraw, become cold, or create ambiguity. The discomfort that follows is not accidental. It is part of the structure. Begging in this dynamic is not just about words like "please don't leave" or "I'm sorry." It is about chasing clarity, seeking reassurance, trying to restore harmony at any cost. The first few times it happens, it may feel situational. You tell yourself the relationship just hit a rough patch. But each time you step forward while they step back, the imbalance grows. Your pursuit becomes predictable, their withdrawal becomes strategic. What solidifies the power dynamic is reinforcement. When you beg, they re-engage. When you apologize, they soften. When you plead, they grant access again. This creates a powerful psychological loop. Your nervous system learns that relief comes through submission. Their ego learns that distance increases their value. The pattern begins to operate almost automatically. Over time, they internalize the idea that emotional control equals relational authority. They may start escalating the tension because the reward remains the same. You return, you explain, you justify, you try harder. Begging becomes evidence of their importance. It reassures them that they hold the upper hand. The relationship shifts from mutual connection to a hierarchy where one destabilizes and the other stabilizes. This dynamic also protects their fragile self-concept. If you are the one pleading, they never have to confront vulnerability. They never have to risk rejection. Your desperation shields them from insecurity. That is why they become so confident during standoffs. They are not waiting to see what happens. They believe the outcome is already decided. The power was never just about winning arguments. It was about training you to move first, fold first, and fear distance more than they do. Silent treatments as manipulation traps are rarely about needing space. In relationships marked by strong narcissistic traits, often associated with patterns seen in narcissistic personality disorder, silence becomes a calculated emotional device. It is not neutral absence, it is loaded absence. The withdrawal is designed to create anxiety, confusion, and self-doubt in the other person. When they suddenly go quiet after conflict, your nervous system reacts. Humans are wired for connection and threat detection. Unexplained silence feels like danger. You start replaying conversations, searching for what you did wrong. You may reach out to clarify, apologize, or smooth things over. That reaction is the trap closing. The more distressed you become, the more power the silence appears to hold. The manipulation lies in ambiguity. They do not clearly say, "I need a day to cool off." Instead, they disappear emotionally while remaining technically present. Messages may be ignored, affection is withheld, eye contact diminishes, the uncertainty keeps you destabilized. Without clear communication, your mind fills in the blanks, often with self-blame. This shifts responsibility away from them and onto you. Over time, the silent treatment conditions behavior. You learn that expressing needs, questioning inconsistencies, or setting boundaries may lead to emotional exile. To avoid that pain, you begin self-censoring. You may swallow concerns, soften your tone, or over-accommodate. Silence becomes a disciplinary tool. It teaches you that harmony depends on compliance. For the narcissistic individual, this tactic reinforces control. They do not have to argue their position or admit fault. They simply remove connection. When you break first and attempt repair, it confirms their leverage. The trap works because it exploits attachment. You seek resolution, they wait for pursuit. What makes this especially destabilizing is the unpredictability. Sometimes silence follows minor issues. Sometimes major issues are ignored entirely. The inconsistency intensifies anxiety and strengthens the conditioning loop. Eventually, the fear of being ignored can become stronger than the desire to be understood, and the silence achieves exactly what it was designed to do: maintain dominance without overt confrontation. Ego injury when you don't chase is one of the most destabilizing experiences for someone organized around narcissistic defenses, often described within patterns linked to narcissistic personality disorder. Their sense of self is not as solid as it appears. It relies heavily on external reactions to maintain stability. Admiration, pursuit, reassurance, even conflict. All of it confirms that they matter. When you stop chasing, you interrupt that supply. At first, they may interpret your silence as temporary pride. They assume you are waiting for the right moment to reach out. Their confidence rests on history. If you have always pursued before, they expect repetition. But as time stretches and you remain still, something shifts internally. The expected validation does not arrive. The mirror they relied on to reflect their importance goes dark. This is where ego injury begins. It is not simple disappointment, it is a threat to identity. If you are not scrambling to regain them, what does that mean about their value? If you are not apologizing, were they ever truly in control? The absence of pursuit forces them into uncomfortable territory, uncertainty about their significance. Because their self esteem is externally regulated, your non reaction creates a vacuum. They may experience agitation, irritability, or sudden urges to provoke a response. Some escalate with criticism or accusations, attempting to draw you back into emotional engagement. Others switch tactics and attempt charm, acting as though nothing happened. Both responses stem from the same wound, the need to restore ego equilibrium. Ego injury can also activate defensiveness. Instead of reflecting, they may rewrite the narrative. They might claim they never cared, that they were planning to leave anyway, or that you were the one who failed. Protecting the grandiose self-image becomes urgent. Your refusal to chase exposes the fragility beneath it. What destabilizes them most is not anger or confrontation, it is indifference. When you do not compete, justify, or plead, you remove the emotional fuel that props up their inflated identity. Without your reaction, they are left facing a reality they work hard to avoid. They are not as indispensable as they believed. The collapse of their control narrative is not dramatic on the surface. It happens internally, quietly, when the story they have been telling themselves no longer matches reality. In dynamics shaped by strong narcissistic traits, often aligned with patterns described in narcissistic personality disorder, there is usually a carefully constructed belief. I control the emotional temperature of this relationship. They see themselves as the one who decides when there is closeness, when there is distance, when there is tension, and when there is relief. That belief becomes their psychological anchor. Over time, they build a narrative that you are predictable. If they withdraw, you pursue. If they criticize, you defend. If they threaten to leave, you panic. Each repeated interaction strengthens the storyline that they hold the upper hand. This narrative protects them from vulnerability because it reassures them that outcomes are manageable. They are not at risk. You are. When you stop responding as expected, that internal script begins to fracture. If they create distance and you do not close it, the anticipated sequence fails. There is no pursuit, no apology, no emotional scrambling. The pattern that once guaranteed control suddenly produces nothing. This forces a confrontation with unpredictability, something they deeply resist. The collapse is destabilizing because it exposes an illusion. Control was never absolute. It was dependent on your participation. When you withdraw that participation, the structure weakens. They may try to reassert dominance through new tactics, charm, anger, guilt, triangulation. But these attempts reveal desperation rather than authority. Internally, they must grapple with a shift they cannot easily process. If they are not controlling the narrative, who is? If you are not reacting, are you detached? If you are detached, do they still matter? The control narrative once shielded them from insecurity. Without it, doubt seeps in. What unravels is not just strategy, but identity. Their confidence was rooted in the belief that your emotions were accessible and influenceable. When that belief collapses, so does the sense of superiority tied to it, leaving them confronted with the unsettling realization that their power depended far more on your compliance than they ever admitted to themselves. The shift from arrogance to panic is rarely visible at first, but internally it can be intense. In relational patterns often associated with narcissistic personality disorder, arrogance functions as a protective shield. It projects certainty, superiority, and emotional detachment. When they withdraw or create distance, they often do so with calm confidence, believing the outcome is predictable. They assume you will reach out, apologize, or attempt to restore connection. That expectation allows them to remain composed. Arrogance is sustained by reinforcement. If history shows that you typically chase, their sense of dominance feels justified. They interpret your past pursuit as proof of desirability and control. In their internal narrative, they are the one with options, the one who can afford indifference. That belief stabilizes their self-image. Panic begins when reality diverges from expectation. As time passes and you remain silent, the anticipated validation does not appear. The arrogance that once felt solid begins to crack. Questions surface. Why haven't they reached out? Are they moving on? Did I miscalculate? Because their self-worth is externally regulated, your non-reaction creates emotional instability. The absence of pursuit feels like erasure. This transition is subtle but powerful. Arrogance says, they need me. Panic whispers, what if they don't? That whisper can grow louder with each passing day. They may begin monitoring your activity more closely, looking for signs of movement. They might test the waters with casual messages or indirect attempts to provoke a response. These behaviors are not random. They are efforts to restore equilibrium. Panic threatens their carefully maintained image of control. It exposes dependence they do not like to acknowledge. While they may still present confidence outwardly, internally there can be agitation, irritability, even obsession. The shift happens because their emotional system was built on predictability. When you remove that predictability, the armor of arrogance weakens, revealing anxiety underneath. Anxiety rooted in the fear of losing significance and no longer being the center of your emotional world. Your silence as psychological detachment is not passive. It is an active internal shift. In dynamics shaped by strong narcissistic traits, often linked to patterns described in narcissistic personality disorder, silence used to mean protest, hurt, or waiting. But when detachment occurs, silence becomes different. It is no longer loaded with expectation. It is no longer a strategy to make them notice. It is the absence of emotional investment. Psychological detachment happens first inside you. It is the moment you stop trying to decode every message, stop rehearsing conversations in your head, stop imagining how to fix what they broke. The nervous system that once reacted intensely to distance begins to stabilize. Their withdrawal does not create the same spike of anxiety. You may still feel sadness or disappointment, but it is no longer fused with urgency. This shift is powerful because narcissistic dynamics often depend on emotional reactivity. When you detach, you remove the reinforcement loop. You are no longer chasing reassurance. You are no longer performing emotional labor to maintain connection. Your silence stops being a temporary pause and becomes a boundary. From their perspective, this feels unfamiliar. Previously, silence from you might have been followed by pursuit. Now it is followed by consistency. You are not checking in. You are not escalating. You are not attempting to re-engage. That consistency signals something deeper than anger. It signals withdrawal of attachment. Detachment also changes your internal narrative. Instead of asking, how do I get them back? You begin asking, why was I tolerating this? The focus shifts from preserving the relationship to preserving yourself. Emotional energy that once flowed toward them begins redirecting inward. Silence in this state is not manipulation, it is regulation. It reflects acceptance rather than protest. The absence of reaction communicates that you are no longer participating in the dynamic. Without confrontation or drama, detachment quietly dissolves the emotional contract that once kept you tethered, leaving behind a stillness that signals you are no longer available for the cycle to continue. Why not begging permanently changes the power structure comes down to one core truth. Power in narcissistic dynamics is sustained through reaction. In relational patterns often associated with narcissistic personality disorder, control is not enforced through physical dominance but through emotional leverage. The person who reacts more intensely is usually the one who appears to hold less power. When you begged, pursued, or tried to repair what they destabilized, you reinforced that imbalance. Begging functions as confirmation. It tells them that distance works, that silence is effective, that withdrawal increases their value. Every time you moved toward them in distress, the hierarchy solidified. They became the gatekeeper of connection. You became the seeker. That structure depends entirely on repetition. When you refuse to beg, you interrupt the reinforcement cycle. The tactic they relied on no longer produces the same result. Silence from them does not create pursuit from you. Criticism does not create over-explanation. Emotional withholding does not create panic. Without those predictable responses, their leverage weakens. This shift alters perception on both sides. Internally, you begin to experience agency. You recognize that you can tolerate distance without collapsing. You discover that the fear of losing them was stronger than the reality of their absence. That realization restructures your confidence. You are no longer negotiating from desperation. From their perspective, the hierarchy destabilizes. If you are not chasing, they cannot position themselves as the prize. If you are not pleading, they cannot frame themselves as the authority. The power structure was never absolute. It was co-created through interaction. When you withdraw your participation, the imbalance cannot sustain itself. What makes the change permanent is self-respect. Once you see that you can survive without begging, it becomes harder to return to that role. Even if they attempt to re-engage, the dynamic has been exposed. You understand that your reaction once fueled their dominance. By choosing restraint, you redefine the terms. The relationship may continue or it may end, but the psychological hierarchy that depended on your desperation cannot easily be rebuilt once you have stepped out of it.